Would you like to be able to stop every negative thought midstream and create mental patterns that are positive and helpful even in the middle of your daily life? If so, that's exactly what the 10 tips that I'm going to be talking about today will help you to do. So by the end of this video, you'll know how to interrupt unhelpful thoughts, replace them consciously, and start dissolving the deep patterns that keep you stuck. But first, let's just get honest about the content of our minds. If you had to guess what percentage of your thoughts in the last week have been helpful, and by helpful I mean they've led to your feeling peaceful and free, the truth is that for most people it's a really small percentage. Now ultimately, yoga philosophy points to something far deeper than just having positive thoughts. It points to the witness consciousness that underlies all thoughts and isn't dependent on any particular state of mind. It remains exactly the same, whatever kind of thoughts you're having, positive or negative, pleasant or unpleasant. But for someone who's hoping to recognize that constant, unchanging awareness within themselves, a quieter, clearer mind can help that recognition take place much more easily than a chaotic, anxious one. I mean, I expect you've noticed yourselves that when you're feeling positive and happy, there's a sense of lightness and of spaciousness that lets the being shine through. Whereas when your thoughts are negative, they seem louder, there seem to be more of them, they're more disturbing, and they drain your energy and your attention. So it's not surprising that Patanjali's Yoga Sutras gives us a very practical method for working with the mind, and one that directly addresses these unhelpful thought patterns. The particular verse I'm thinking of is one that says vitarka bhadane pratipaksha bhavana, which means unhelpful thoughts or emotions can be neutralized by cultivating the opposite. But first of all, I should just introduce myself. So hi, I'm Catherine, and on this channel I share the insights and practices that I gained from living 15 years in an ashram in the Himalayas. So the tips I'm going to be sharing with you today, though, are inspired by yoga philosophy, but they also just come from my own exploration and personal experience of dealing with a mind that, like everybody else's mind, has some unhelpful habits of thinking. And by the way, I'm going to be creating a PDF summarizing these 10 tips, so if you want to remind yourself of them afterwards, the link to sign up for that will be in the description below. Also, if you have any tips that I haven't covered here and you think that others would find useful, please definitely do share them in the comments. So let's get started. So we don't just think a negative thought once and never think it again. If we did, to be honest, that wouldn't really be a problem. But our minds tend to travel down the same mental roads over and over. And each repetition deepens what in Sanskrit is called a samskara or a sanskar, a groove of consciousness. In ancient India, grooves would have been formed by bullock cart wheels again and again going along the same dusty road. And once those tracks were set, it would have taken real effort to steer the cart onto a different path. And in exactly the same way, when we repeat certain thoughts, we create grooves in the mind. So the first step is really simple. Whenever you catch a thought that you want to change, say stop. This just brings in a moment of awareness to interrupt that groove and give you the space to choose a different path. If you're familiar with the 3 gunas in yoga philosophy, you'll be aware that tamas is the force of lethargy. It works to keep things crystallized just as they are and to resist change. So whenever a groove is established, tamas, the force of inertia, is at play, keeping things fixed as they are. And to move out of tamas, we always need a bit of the energy of rajas, a bit of force. So the power of movement and momentum to help break through the pattern. So one way of bringing in that force of movement when we say stop might be to stand up and say stop out loud. But obviously if you're in the middle of, the office at work or something, or in a place where you don't want to be talking to yourself out loud, you can just say it to yourself silently in your head, but bring in some hand movement like or. And if that also makes you feel far too self-conscious and conspicuous, you can just do something like clicking your fingers just to wake you up and bring in some of that energy for change. So whether you're speaking out loud or silently to yourself in your head, you want to be careful of the tone of voice that you're using when you're saying stop to yourself. Because there's a fine line between an invigorating tone of voice that wakes you up from your unconscious patterns and a harsh or cross or anxious voice which actually just activates your fight or flight adrenaline response. So remember that when you're saying stop, you're not telling yourself off, and there's no need at all to be afraid of your mind's patterns or frustrated with them. Think of yourself as being like a kind, encouraging, and endlessly patient coach who just says, okay, stop, we're going to change tracks. So which direction do you want to go in now? If at this point you notice that your mind and body are in a state of fight or flight, you can bring in tip 4, which is to bring in some other kind of physical practice to calm down your nervous system. Because sometimes it's really difficult to change the mind if the body is in the wrong state. So if you're anxious, for example, and wanting to bring in calm thoughts, it's going to be much more difficult to do that while your body is rushing around and in a state of heightened alert. So thinking about physical techniques that can help calm your nervous system down, I'm sure you're familiar with them already, but putting your attention on your breath, allowing your breath to slow down is a good one. Stretching can be a good one. Drinking water. Or it could be a kind of self-soothing technique, like in the havening technique, where you stroke your arms to calm your nervous system. Because the mind becomes much more receptive to change once the body is calm. So now let's say you've stopped your negative thought and you've taken a calming deep breath. Now's the time to bring in a replacement thought, a new route for your mind to take. So tip 5 is that when you do this, make sure that you use positive language rather than negative. What I mean by this is, let's say that your old pattern was again and again to think, oh, I'm so useless. Don't replace it with I'm not useless, because subconsciously you're still keeping the idea of uselessness going. So instead you could say something like, I'm capable, I'm determined. My teacher used to tell a story to illustrate why this might be the case. A tired traveller once fell asleep under a tree, not realizing that it was a wish-fulfilling tree. After a while he started to feel hungry, so he thought, oh, I wish I had something to eat. And instantly delicious food appeared. So he enjoyed this delicious meal, and then he thought, oh, I wish I had a really soft bed to lie on. And the next moment, a beautiful, comfortable bed appeared for him to lie on. But after a while, fear crept in, and he thought, oh, I'm all alone in this place. What if a tiger comes and attacks me? And because every thought under that tree became reality, a tiger appeared and the man was devoured. So we do need to be alert to exactly what we're thinking and the language that we're using, because our thoughts have a power to manifest even when that isn't our conscious intention. So let's say you've been having that thought, oh, I'm useless, your whole life. Not surprisingly, if you stop it and change it just once, that isn't likely to undo the samskara, the deep mental groove that's been created. You may actually need to stop it and change it 100 times. But each time, the old pattern weakens and the new one strengthens. And while at the beginning you might be thinking the thought, I'm capable, but not actually really believing in it, you'll find that with repetition, belief starts to come. The belief in the old thought starts to weaken, and the groove that kept you thinking it begins to crumble. So tip 7 is to find evidence that backs up your new way of thinking. So if your new way of thinking is I'm capable, remember times in your life when you've done something very effectively, when you've helped someone, or when you've overcome some obstacle. Treat it like your mind is a court of law. Isn't it true that you would not be able to prove beyond reasonable doubt that you're useless, especially in the face of all the evidence that actually shows the opposite? So why repeat a thought to yourself that is not only very unhelpful, but completely untrue? So now let's say you've been practicing your stop and changing that thought repeatedly over a week. And it's going well, But then you have a bad day. Maybe you slept badly, or you're just in a bad mood, and the old pattern of thinking creeps back in. At that point, you have two choices. One is to say, I put in all that effort and it didn't work, it failed. Here I am thinking the old thoughts again. I give up. And of course, if you do that, the old sanskar will just become dominant again. But the other option is to spot what's happened and say, okay, I'm tired. My old pattern has bounced back a bit, but that's to be expected after a lifetime of practicing it. But I'm not giving up. I'm going to keep going with my efforts to break the pattern, because this is just a bad day. It's just a blip, and I do have the power to change. The next point is really key, and it's where a lot of people get stuck, because it's natural to want to check whether this practice is working. But if you've been stopping and changing thoughts about anxiety concerning the future, for example, if you keep checking, am I less anxious now? Is it working? Am I thinking worried thoughts? That checking itself keeps the anxiety going, because it's keeping your attention on the results rather than on the present action. So as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, your job is simply to do the right action and not to worry about the results. In this case, the action is simply to stop an unhelpful thought and choose a helpful one. The results will come in their own time. You can think of it like planting a seed. You don't dig up the seed every few hours to see if it's sprouting yet. You water it, you protect it, and you let nature do the rest. So that's the attitude of karma yoga, steady effort without stressing about the outcome. So we've come to the final tip, which is to fully imagine your future self and what they want. Because you can choose. Either in a year's time, your future self will be running the same old patterns and feeling guilty about having tried and given up too easily to change them, or your future self will be super pleased and empowered by the fact that they persevered and completely broke that mental habit. And so you can really get into the detail of it. You can close your eyes and think to yourself, where will I be standing? What's the weather like? And how does it feel to be completely free from that mental pattern? You can really embody that future feeling here and now, and then use that feeling again and bring it in when you next do the stop and changing your thought routine. So those are my 10 tips. I hope you try putting them into practice, and if you do, please let me know how you get on in the comments below. But I'd like to end by coming back to the point that Patanjali's teachings about cultivating the opposite thought aren't just about putting you in a better mood. They're to lead us towards yoga, towards union with your highest self. Because the thing is that when we practice pratipaksha bhavana, we start to see that thoughts and feelings are temporary and changeable. They appear, they shift, and they dissolve. And the more we witness this process, the more we recognize that what we are isn't the thoughts, but the awareness in which the thoughts arise. So yes, we do work with thoughts, but ultimately we don't just become free from the negative thoughts, we become free from identifying with any kind of thought at all. And that's when we begin to discover the freedom of what we truly are. So, bye for now.